Today we have the opportunity to start a new study in Sunday school here at Grace, a study of J.I. Packer's Knowing God. Well, we're actually not studying the book so much as letting him guide us in a study of the person and powers and perfections of God. Today my plan for you kids is to spend time with you. First, learning a little bit about J.I. Packer, the author, and a wee bit about how this book came about. And then we'll focus most of our time on one specific theme in chapter 1. So I don't know how many of you will be reading chapter 1. If you're older and can, that'd be wonderful. But if you're younger, just watch this and think about the thought that I focus on, and talk with your parents about it. And I hope that will be an encouragement to you. So let's start by thinking and talking a little bit about J.I. Packer, who he was. He was born in 1926, so that would be between World War I and World War II. And he began his life in a working class neighborhood of Gloucester, England. I think I said that right. Some of those English names are tough. Gloucester is 100 miles west of London. And some of you kids may find it interesting to know that his dad worked for the Great Western Railway, sometimes shortened to GWR. Here's why that's interesting. The next time you see the engine named Duck in a Thomas and Friends episode or movie, look closely at his sides. You'll see GWR in large yellow letters. J.I. Packer's dad worked for that railway in real life. So he was growing up, and he never really fit in as a boy. He was very bookish and tended to be very intellectual, liked thinking about things. But an accident at the age of 7 set him on an even more bookish course. That day, he was running away from schoolboys who were picking on him and taunting him. And while he was running away, he ran into the street and was hit by a small delivery truck. His head was so severely injured that doctors had to insert a metal plate. His head would never be the same, as you can see if you look at pictures of him in later life. His head is flat here, and that's why. But at that point in his life, when he was 7 and the years that followed, with an exposed metal plate in his head with rubber on its edges, it made Packer stand out, in his words, like a speckled bird. He wasn't going to fit in at all now. And that plate put restrictions on him as he became a teenager. As a teenager, no sports and limited physical activity, because it would be terrible if he got hurt again there. And so that steered him even more so into life of reading and intellectual activity, reading and thinking. And, very important for our book today, when he was 11, he was expecting and hoping for a bike on his birthday. But his parents instead gave him a typewriter, which led to him writing. It's amazing how God works. And he would later really apply those thinking and reading and writing skills to writing about God as a result of his journey of faith. He attended church as a boy with his parents and began to take it more seriously in his high school years. But it wasn't until college, when he was studying at Oxford, as he was reading C.S. Lewis and other authors. You might know C.S. Lewis from the famous Chronicles of Narnia series. As he was reading authors like C.S. Lewis and studying the Bible, he came to a point, God brought him to a point where at a meeting of an Oxford student ministry, he finally received and rested in Jesus Christ personally. That was just the beginning of his life story. He would go on to further study and writing and service as a professor and also as a pastor. But I hope that is enough to help you see that J.I. Packer was a real person like you and me, with his own share of real difficulties and joys. Let's learn from him as we might a godly uncle or a trustworthy Sunday school teacher. And we do so letting him guide us by way of this book, which began as a series of articles for a Christian magazine in England. The editor of the magazine asked J.I. Packer to write 2 articles a month about God. And so Packer began each chapter, his own thoughts, with the question, what do I tell my readers next? Or in the case of today's chapter, what should I tell them at the very beginning? Here's the answer. How to approach the study of God. That's what this first chapter is about, the study of God and how to approach it. Let's focus together on just one of those ways. Namely, that we are to approach the study of God recognizing that there is nothing so humbling and comforting as knowing God. Sometime back, I saw a Peanuts cartoon. You know Peanuts, Charlie Brown and Snoopy. In it, Linus, and Lucy are looking outside. It's raining outside, and Lucy asks Linus, "Boy, look at it rain. What if it floods the whole world?" Linus answers, "It will never do that. In the 9th chapter of Genesis, God promised Noah that would never happen again, and the sign of the promise is the rainbow." Lucy is much cheered. "You've taken a great load off my mind," she says. Linus concludes the strip by explaining, sound theology has a way of doing that. Sound theology, sound knowledge of God, sound knowing God has a way of comforting us and humbling us, sometimes at the same time. Take, for instance, a story many of you know, the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. You know the story, how so many people were following Baal, the people of Israel were, and Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to a contest, a trial. They would both go up on Mount Carmel, their holy mountain, and prepare altars and put their sacrifices on them and pray to their gods and see which one sent fire to burn up the sacrifice. And the prophets of Baal started. They cried out to their God all day long, and he never answered. They even cut themselves, and Baal didn't answer. Along the way, we hear Elijah taunt quite memorably, "Maybe you need to shout out louder. Maybe Baal is on vacation or sleeping." Well, was he sleeping, kids? No. He wasn't listening because he can't listen. Finally, it was Elijah's turn near the end of the day. And Elijah the prophet came near and said, I'm reading now from 1 Kings 18, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back." Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And the people afterwards fell on their faces, calling out to the Lord, "He is God." Stories like that are meant to humble and comfort us. To humble us, remind us that the Lord, He is God. And to comfort us, remind us in times of trouble or hardship that the God we know is worthy of our trust, is a good one to trust. I remember one time I was having a rough time, and a lady in our church, an older lady, a widow lady who had known her share of tough times, she encouraged me by telling me something that someone had once told her to do. You take a piece of paper and you write the letters A, B, C, D, all the way down to Z, one letter each line, and then on each line you write out a name or an attribute of God. So for instance, A might be all-powerful, B might be beautiful, C might be creator. And by the time you get to Z, you're reminded that yes, my times are tough, but my God is greater. Knowing God humbles and comforts us. So I ask you, do you want to know God? In fact, think about this question. How have you been humbled and comforted by your knowledge of God in the past? Ask your parents that question. Talk about it together. Knowing God is our greatest privilege. I look forward to talking with you again next week.